Hi, my name is Remy Perry, and I'm with the Brain Injury Association of York Region. About 9.5 years ago, my wife and I were involved in a car accident that left her with post-concussion syndrome. The experts said that in a few months, everything would be fine. Well, nearly a decade later, she still has symptoms. And meanwhile, as her caregiver, I've joined the board of BIAR. And I've started this podcast to help out other caregivers to learn some of the things that I wish I had learned and I am still learning as a caregiver today. Today, I am speaking with Rachel Greenwood, who is a case manager with Innovative Case Management here in Toronto. Welcome, Rachel. Thanks for agreeing to talk to us.
Happy to be here.
So, how long have you been doing this? One of the things that I've known you for a while, I never thought to ask you.
Yeah, I've been case managing for 14 years now with Innovative Case Management. Prior to that, I've always worked in the field of brain injury for the entirety of my career.
And what drew you to case management in particular?
It- Having worked in the public sector, Remy, where funding is non-existent and being able to meet client needs is sort of beyond challenging, the idea of being able to facilitate recovery and access funds theoretically through the auto insurance and being able to make change is probably the biggest draw for me.
And so that's really, we need to expand a little bit on this. You mentioned
Sure.
accessing funds. What is it that a case manager does as part of a rehab team? What are they the center of the team? I would, you know,
They
I,
are the
I always
shining
think the
star.
survivor is the team, but what role does the case manager play in that recovery of the survivor?
Yeah, that's a great question, Remy. I would say I'd like to start with sort of like the base definition. Really, it's the coordination of care for any survivor, and that includes rehabilitation and medical services geared towards facilitating maximum recovery. That includes like a return to function, return to meaningful engagement, return to activities of daily life, all of those good things. There are, I think, important to say, multiple domains that case management occurs in. So I work in the auto insurance industry. So I provide support for individuals who have been in motor vehicle accidents, sustained their brain injuries that way. That is the question. That is where the funding comes into play, right? We request funding from
Right.
the auto insurance for different providers, different services, different equipment, so on and so forth. There are, in fact, publicly funded equivalents um, who some of the same services, some of the same resourcing, system navigation that can happen through local brain injury associations, that can happen through wonderful places like the March of Dimes. Some hospitals have, outpatient programs that can do some of that stuff as well. So I think over the course of our conversation, keeping in mind that I work primarily in the auto insurance,
Right.
that will be the experience that I'm sharing.
But do you find that your experience as a case manager is similar to other case managers who, for example, work for Obaya or March of Dimes or whoever? You're all kind of doing the same thing?
So the is the same. The funding is the major
Yeah.
difference. So I spent the first part of my career working in publicly funded um, organizations, and my clients were deciding between buying a coffee and you know potentially can they go to a movie if they don't have coffee 12 days in a row, sort of thing, right? Versus being able to ask the auto insurance for an iPad because it's going to help with cognitive recovery, and then having funding appear. So they're same jobs, very different playing fields, if you will.
But still a bit of a challenge. I don't imagine auto insurance companies are in the habit of giving away money just willy-nilly.
Three wonderful words: reasonable and necessary, right? So part of my job as a case manager is to make sure that the things that we are requesting funding for fall within that domain, fall within what's reasonable and necessary. And there's lots of ways to dance that dance. There's lots of ways to, provide rationale to support our needs, that kind of thing. So, yeah.
Over time, you learn what kind of things to put in, what kind of things will work, will get turned down, will get approved, the
Yeah,
type of wording to use.
absolutely. It's all about being able to rationalize what it is that we're requesting, right? So, our client, a survivor, may need a good pair of safe and appropriate shoes. Fantastic. So we're not going to ask for Air Jordans because they are, the client's favorite shoe,
Yeah.
right? We're going to look at a solid pair of New Balance that are probably wide fit, have a good sturdy base, and that's what we're going to ask for. The reasonable part and the necessary part. The shoes are necessary, the request is reasonable.
And do you deal with the same people all the time, or are you dealing with different people in the insurance area?
I deal with different providers and different adjusters and different insurance companies,
You
different
get
personal
to
injury lawyers,
you
you
get to
name it.
know them, or they're
Different.
always different?
It's always different. On occasion, I end up with the adjuster that I'm familiar with. Oftentimes, over 14 years of doing this, obviously, I've built some good relationships with various providers, and I get to
Yeah.
know who fits with who. Right. Part of my job is not to work from a cookie cutter approach. I work from the perspective of I know my client, I know the needs, I know their fit, their personality, that kind of thing. And then I based on skill set and based on personality.
Right. Which
Yeah.
brings me to my next question. If I'm
Yeah.
injured in a car accident, or I'm a caregiver, so my
Hmm.
wife or someone I know is injured in a car accident, how are we put in touch with you? How do you enter this? Is it the auto insurance company that refers you? Do you contact them? Does an OT contact you? Where do you come in?
Yeah. Another really great question. So there's a couple entry points that happen in the insurance process. So when the client is determined to have a catastrophic injury, they are entitled to case management under the statutory accident benefit schedule. So the SABs, which is what sort of governs everything that we do. Um, a client, a survivor, can be deemed catastrophic at multiple times across along their recovery timeline. So as early as a month, if they've been in a coma for a month, right? They are automatically catastrophic at that point. They get a case manager. Um, if they have positive imaging, so a CT scan, an MRI, something that shows,
Right.
that brain damage has occurred, they can apply for catastrophic as early as 6 months. They can apply again at 12 months and or 2 years, depending on what's happening. So there's a bunch of different things.
Right.
I become involved when that catastrophic determination is made. And I receive my referrals primarily through personal injury lawyers. So they
Okay.
are in touch with me. They typically they know my skill set. Could be they want me, could be they want my colleague Joey, could be they want my colleague Nina because she works with kids, whatever. We are matched the same way that we then go forward to match the referrals that we make for our clients. Now, you mentioned, do the adjusters reach out? That happens sometimes, absolutely. So
Right. Okay.
we can get referrals there. Sometimes family members find us, Remy, right? Sometimes people are trying to figure out how to navigate the auto insurance system. They hear case manager, they look it up, we get a cold call, right? Sometimes we're Googled. There's all sorts of things. So, but I would say the personal injury lawyers refer to us.
Okay. So if we're looking for, a
Hmm.
case manager, I'd heard about it. Either, the person I'm looking after has met someone else who has a case manager, and we go, wow, that's a great idea. That's how I would do it. I would just look it up online, and there you are, innovative case management.
There we are. Yeah, there is a trauma resource directory that exists where you can find a wide variety of different providers. So you can find OTs and physios and speech language pathologists. You can find psychologists and case managers. I'm not sure how regularly that is updated, but it does exist. And then again, on a variety of the Community Brain Injury Association websites and things, we often have useful links posted there as well, which lets people know where to start. And again, some of those community associations have pretty wide reaching connections. So one association to another, just kind of like a web of support and services.
In situations like you talked about, someone who has been deemed catastrophic,
Mhm.
automatically you're dialed in. Can someone who
Correct.
does not sustain a catastrophic injury, do they get your services, or is that something that they'd have to pay for, or how does that work?
Yeah, so there's a couple of other circumstances where I am automatically involved or a case manager is automatically involved. Um, Through the auto insurance, we now have the opportunity to purchase optional benefits, right? So that's something where we can buy up certain things in our insurance. And there are optional benefits that enable a non catastrophic injury. So someone who has not yet been deemed CAT may never be deemed CAT, they can access case management services. So, from that perspective, that's another way that I get involved. And then, yeah, certainly privately, people can hire us privately. So again, that exert or hospitals sometimes will speak to people at the time of discharge. Like if you think about it, um, there's lots of ways to get a brain injury, right? You have a slip and a fall. You,
How do you need to get to know your client? How do you get
yeah,
to know your client? Do you meet with them personally? Is it an online thing? Do you call them first? How often do you meet? When do you meet with them? Lots of
so
questions.
many So
So,
many questions. So first and foremost, if is in working in an auto insurance capacity,
mhm.
I am going to have an initial phone call, be it with the client, the caregiver, whomever is the right touch point, because that's different person per person and situation by situation. I then have to prepare the document that requests the funding from the insurance company. And once approvals are in place, I am certainly meeting with the client in person. Absolutely. Um, at their home, if they're comfortable, that to me is the best way for me to get a fuller picture of what life is really like, right? Um, I know we all spent a period of time sitting on screens like this.
Oh, yes.
Yeah,
Too much, too much.
correct. In this situation, say you and I are meeting for the first time. I know nothing about you because your background is blurred and you're here smiling, so you're obviously happy and fine, right? Versus when I'm in someone's home, I see it all and I can take the different nuances into account and I can see, the laundry shoved under the couch. I can see, when they maybe offer me coffee that the fridge is empty. I can see that the dish is on the counter. I can see all the things where things are maybe falling apart. Um, so yes, definitely in person, definitely at the client's home if that's where they're comfortable. And the frequency depends. I really like to start with a higher frequency, Remy. I like to go in person, often weekly at the beginning, right? To check in to see. Again, I'm rapport building. I'm establishing trust. I'm creating that relationship with the survivor, but also with the caregiver, caregivers. Time it's plural, right? There's family members. There's all sorts of things. I'm learning about the community and the likes and the dislikes. I'm learning all sorts of things from these meetings. Um, and then, yeah, over time that naturally fades a little bit, right? I also meet with my clients in the community sometimes. I have some much prefer to sit in a coffee shop with me than sit in their house, right? Or we meet at doctor's appointments where I'm helping to take notes and keep track of information.
And
Yeah.
you mentioned doctor's appointments,
Hmm.
OTs, physiotherapists, these type of people. Do you meet with them? Do you talk with them? Do you come to appointments?
They're sick of me
Yeah.
typically on some level. Yeah, so I mean, to get that point, I'd like to just go back a couple steps, right? So my role is to build that team, right? So often
You're the
less
one who comes up with the PT
cor-
or the OT or
correct, correct. I spend this time getting to know the survivor, getting to have conversations. I really feel like best practice is to spend time, one on one with the survivor if I can, and if they're okay with that. And then additionally, have a call with the caregiver to get some collateral, or in a perfect situation where everybody is comfortable with, the ups and downs and the highlights kind of thing. We do it all together. We have a conversation all together where, you as a caregiver could say, hey, my wife struggles with this. Your wife would say, yeah, actually, he's right. I forgot about that. And we get a full picture. Doesn't often happen like that, but it can, and that's a wonderful thing. Otherwise, I pull that information separately. Those first few sessions, I'm getting to understand likes and dislikes. I'm getting a sense of personality. I'm starting to sort of understand, are there cultural things that I have to consider when I'm making referrals? I have some female survivors that I work with that don't want male providers on their team. I have right?
Yes.
Some who require a specific language. I have all sorts of things, right? Um, so then I get to build the team, Remy. I get to make referrals that fit with that client, and I get to um, check in and monitor and see how that relationship is going and tweak things and make changes. I am sometimes brought in when there's already a team in place, and then I figure out where I fit and I figure out what's missing and I figure out what I can add. And often, like you'd be surprised, even on files that are, 2 years old, I get brought in and I'm like, ooh, here's six other things we can do, right? Why don't we do it a little bit differently? Why don't we see if there's something we can add to support what's already happening or to move us forward? Um, so your question, because that was sort of a long background, do I meet with the team? Absolutely. Absolutely. I
Okay.
talk with them, I email with them. Um, definitely there are team members where it's more so than others. That is also survivor specific, right? So if someone has a return to work goal, the OT and I are in conversations all the time, right? If someone's dealing with some language difficulties, the speech language pathologist and I are talking. And then we're making sure part of my role is to make sure that what happens in these side conversations is expressed and communicated to the team because we can't work in silos. We're not effective if we're working in silos.
Right.
The need to be sort of known to everyone, shared with everyone, input from everyone. It's the most successful way to do it. So we have team meetings that include the client, that include, the caregiver, that sometimes include the law office if they want to participate. Sometimes the adjuster comes. Fantastic. We also have clinical meetings, which is usually just the team, right? Where we can speak a bit more freely and we can really problem solve and troubleshoot and take our ideas back to the survivor and the caregiver at a separate time.
It
So,
seems a lot more efficient than, I mean, in a lot of cases I've heard
yeah.
the healthcare professionals are relying on the survivor for information about other healthcare professionals. So, for example, the physiotherapist will say, "Well, what's the physiatrist saying?" and so on, and
Mm,
asking someone who has a brain injury to try to
correct.
remember all of this. And
Or a very tired caregiver. Yeah.
right. Well, and that's the
Hmm.
thing is, and a very
Yeah.
stressed caregiver, and we'll get to that later on in our
Absolutely.
conversation because
Yeah.
one of the things that I've had to do as a caregiver is become a really meticulous note taker and be organized
Yes.
and all of that. Um, do you have caregivers that are willing and able and involved? Do you
Yeah.
try to make the most of their help and really sort of recruit them? It is that you're doing. If they're willing to make sure that they remind them to do their whatever it is that they've been asked to do, you can talk to them and say, you're on site, I'm not every day. And
Yeah.
is that something
I
you use or do you stay away from that?
I love that question, and I think there are multiple answers, Remy, right? Um, Certainly, if a caregiver is in a good place, so sleeping, eating, having time to themselves, and somehow still being able to sort of manage their own needs and care as well as that of their survivor, their loved one, um, certainly be involved. And I would never ask a caregiver to step back. I shouldn't say never. I would rarely ask a caregiver to step back.
Mhm.
Um, but one of the bonuses of having me or having a case manager is that we can alleviate some of that. We can take some things off a caregiver's plate. We can take the administrative part. We can take the resourcing and the system navigation pieces, and we can do those things. Um, I think that it is really easy to ask the person in the house to do everything. It's not always really appropriate,
Right.
right? Because, yeah, we have people for that. This is one of the perks of the auto insurance, right? I can put a PSW in place who can help with queuing and prompting if the survivor is okay with that, having someone in the house. There are virtual systems that can do the same thing. So I can apply for funding for a smartwatch and the smartwatch goes off and does the reminders to do your physio, right? Um,
Rather than
we
it
can
being
have
up to the kid
absolutely,
constantly remember. Do you find,
absolutely.
I mean, one of the reasons why I think it's so important for caregivers to receive
Yeah,
themselves is because we are so essential to toot
Of
my own horn,
course.
in the recovery
Of
of the
course.
survivor, because if we fall,
Yeah.
it doesn't do any good for the survivor,
Yeah.
particularly in catastrophic cases.
Yeah.
Do you find yourself actually helping out the caregiver in terms of organizing
Absolutely.
their lives and them almost not quite as much support, but certainly some support in their life so that they can be 100% or at least 80% for the survivor?
Yeah, so we would shoot obviously for a percentage that allows the caregiver to also take care of themselves a bit, right? I understand wanting to give everything. I get, but then you're no good to us, to anyone, right? Because you're exhausted and you're burnt out, and all of these things happen. One of the perks of the auto insurance industry is that people who are not even directly involved in the automobile accident can sometimes access funding if they are impacted by the survivor's injuries, right? So we have the ability to work with the law office and work with the treatment team, we being case managers, to say, hey, like Remy is struggling. I would love to get Remy a social worker. To do that, we have to open up a claim for Remy. So that happens with the support of the law office. They put in an OCF1. We could talk about all the
I know
OCFs, but
all about
holy
the
cow.
OCFs, yes.
I know. But so we would open a claim, and once the claim is open, we would put in a treatment plan requesting support for you. So, and I think most typically people assume that caregivers want counseling. Great, have some counseling. I've had success putting yoga therapy in place for caregivers so they have some time to just catch their breath and to have
Mm.
some support in that way. I've had um, personal trainers approved, I've had massage approved, I've had all sorts of things approved that really just give the caregiver a second to themselves sometimes in a therapeutic space, right? Um, in terms of how I can assist or how a case manager can assist, again, it's that offloading, right? It's the trust and rapport with the caregiver as well as with the survivor. So it can be a bit tricky because in my role, the survivor's needs goals are typically paramount, right?
Of
So
course.
if there is dissension, if the survivor wants to go back to work and the caregiver's like, are you kidding me? Like, we're never going to do this. Why are we focusing on this? Right? Just an example. Um, I'm navigating that with the team. I'm navigating that with the caregiver. I'm helping and providing education. I'm talking about how do we move towards the client's goals, the survivor's goals without extinguishing hope, right? Not my job to trample on anybody's dreams. It's my job to facilitate things as best I can to get us as far as we can, while being aware of the bigger picture, while knowing that I've not ever met one person with a brain injury whose brain injury only impacted them, right? It impacts the whole family, the whole community. It can extend like circle, circle, it just goes. So, yeah.
If you're working with someone who is
Hmm.
a survivor of a catastrophic brain injury and is dealing with
Yeah.
that and is dead set, they want to get back to work, they want everything back.
Yeah.
And in your experience and working with the other healthcare professionals,
Of
that's
course.
probably not likely going to happen the way they see that. But that's not
Yep.
really your job to say, no, that's not going to happen. Or is it, for example, your job to maybe talk to the other healthcare professionals who talk to them and say, well, it may be more reasonable to go a little slower. We're not going to get you back next week or next year even or whatever.
Yeah,
Um,
so combination of both, for sure. So when I say it's not my job to say no, I mean exactly that. So let's say you sustain an injury, Remy,
right,
and you're like, I would like to get back to podcasting, but meanwhile you can't remember, three questions in who you're even talking to,
right.
right? So we're going to focus on those three questions, and we're going to build endurance and tolerance for the activity, and we're going to get as far as we can with getting you back to podcasting, and
Mhm.
that is a multidisciplinary process. But at the same time, we're having a conversation where I'm saying, hey, Remy, you can remember three questions right now, and that's fantastic. Let's see what we can do with that. Right. So we're not at the end goal, but I'm not telling you that we're not going to get to the end goal because I don't know. Right. Nobody can actually predict that. We can speak experientially, but people and brains are remarkable. Right.
Yeah.
So,
One
yeah,
of the least known parts of the human body that even the
absolutely.
neurologists, neurosurgeons, nobody really knows with any 100%
Correct. Correct.
certainty.
Right, you're playing
And it would
sport.
seem to me that anybody who has a brain injury, anybody who is off work or who has their life turned upside down, catastrophic or not, would really benefit from someone who does what you do. That
Thank you.
when I think back to our own case, much of what you've described, or some of what you've described,
Hmm.
was taken on by the occupational therapist, which is why when I
Correct.
first met you, I thought you were an occupational therapist, and
It's
I
true.
and set me straight on the differences between that. And
Yeah.
we won't necessarily go into that in depth now, but in cases where there isn't a case manager, is that who does it? Is it the doctor? Is it the lawyer? Who does all that? Or is it the caregiver? Us, because
Yeah.
we work the
So,
chief.
right. So, combination of most of the above is what I would say, Remy, quite honestly. So, in the auto insurance industry, if a client has not yet been deemed CAT, often the OT takes on that role of making referrals, of doing some resources, of connecting, people to brain injury associations, things like that. The doctor, obviously, we're hoping is going to do the medical referrals and know the medical referrals to make, right? And I mean, not all GPs are created equally, but you know, the news is that there are medical rehab specialists out there. There are physiatrists who can help navigate this. There are all sorts of people in the OHIP system who can help once you get to them. Um, Social workers sometimes take on the role as well. But yeah, caregivers do a lot of it, Remy, which is so hard, which is again, um, it's funny sometimes when I walk on the scene, let's say it's been a year and a half, it's been 2 years, there's either a group of people sighing in relief and handing me the to-do list, right?
I can
Or
understand
there's,
this.
well, we've been doing just fine without you. So why are you here now?
Well,
Right?
yeah. I keep thinking
So
that the caregiver is easily the least qualified person of all the
absolutely.
people that you've mentioned, and yet it
Yes.
falls to that person. I mean, if you're in luck, you've got someone who is naturally organized and is a manager
Yeah.
in their work life or in their
Yeah.
personality. But, a lot of us were just getting by, we get signed on to the job by the fact that we care about the survivor. Um,
Correct.
and it's too bad that case managers don't automatically get assigned to people with, because anybody whose life is turned upside down needs one.
Yeah, it feels a little bit egotistical to say, "Yes, I agree." But I feel like, yeah, there's a lot that I can offer and that
Well, I
case
mean,
managers can
it's
offer.
not so much egotistical. You're trained to do this. This is
Correct.
something you went to school to learn how to do, and you spent however many years doing it. Well, you said 14 years doing this. So
14 now. Yep.
yeah, I mean, this isn't an ego. It's like me saying, I know a little bit about teaching because I spent 3 decades doing
Because
it.
you did, yeah, fair.
Do it, and you're certainly trained to do it and do it a very good job. If you had any advice for caregivers, though, whether or not you're working with them, or if there are caregivers out there watching this who don't have the luxury of having a case manager, what would you say to them? Do you have any advice for them?
So much advice. I think what's really important is to pause sometimes and catch your breath. I think that's super important in any sort of situation, especially a caregiver situation, because the systems are fast and furious, and won't actually have to work to that speed, right? And I don't think people understand that. Like we don't have to. Not everything is a crisis. Not everything is critical. And the auto insurance industry tends to make us think that everything is like do it right now or else, right? Kind of thing. So I think that pausing and regrouping and making lists, Remy, oh my goodness, making lists so that you don't lose track of things is super
Write
important.
everything down.
Write everything down,
Yeah.
right? And if you weren't in a previous life someone who liked a highlighter, like get a highlighter, right? Get those poignant big points and make sure that those are the ones that jump out on that page because you're going to take a lot of notes. You're going to fill a lot of notebooks. But ask for help, right? And help. So if there's no case manager on the scene and the caregiver is doing this independently, right? Um, ask the family doctor, is there someone that can help me? Um, Please look into community brain injury associations because they often have people who can do some of the resources, who will go to appointments with you, right? Each one functions a little bit differently. They all function under like their own sort of rules and processes. Everyone is connected to the Ontario Brain Injury Association, which is great. There are mentorship programs for caregivers, so there's you can pick up the phone and call them, call someone whose lived experience is yours, right? Not to toot our horn, and I don't think you mentioned this, I'm also on the with the Brain Injury Association of York Region, and we've got this amazing caregiver service, right? So put your feet up and do some meditation because it's these things exist. We have things available. Um, but you have to ask for it a lot of the time. It's much like our medical system. It's like much like the health system. If you don't ask for things, you're sadly
And
not
you
going to
have to
get
know
them.
they exist to ask for them because,
Absolutely.
I,
So
I,
this on the record, they exist, right? They do not exist to the extent that I think any of us would like them to exist, but there are services out there.
tips for dealing with insurance companies that you have, um, aside from being patient and not swearing at them and, um,
Yeah, please don't swear at them, because it likely won't get you very far. So, I mean, there's a few situations, Remy, actually, where either a caregiver or a survivor would be speaking to the insurance company. That would be at the beginning of a claim and before they have representation. So once a lawyer is involved, in fact, the insurance company and the adjuster are not supposed to speak with you, right? They're not supposed to speak with your survivor. They are supposed to speak to your legal representation and or, right, once your case manager is there or your treatment team, whoever is requesting the funds. Um, I think that it is not common for people to understand this insurance system. I think there is a belief that we pay for insurance and everything will be taken care of when we need it. Um, if only that were the
yeah,
case.
you
Um,
get abused of that pretty quickly when you file a claim.
it's a pretty challenging system, right? It's a pretty challenging system. And I think, as with anything that has the potential to be adversarial, which is not me suggesting that insurance companies behave like that, but um, I think for a layperson, it's unknown and it's scary. And I think the advice I would give would be go in expecting the best and speaking with respect and having your questions prepared in advance, right? And if they ask you something and you don't know the answer, just say, "Hey, like I'd be happy to get back to you with that." Don't feel like you have to answer questions that you don't know the answer to.
So patience is the key, realizing
Absolutely.
you're not going to get approved every time. And if you are
No.
going to get approved, it won't be right away necessarily.
Right. Well, and I do think that's part of the role. And again, I know we're speaking about if there is not a case manager involved, but there would be maybe an OT at this point, or a physiotherapist, or someone who has that experience, because most of the people who work in the industry for some time, so they would know those things, and they should be sharing that information with you as well, right? To set expectations, because that is, I think, first and foremost, how we approach this, how we approach things. It's all about realistic expectations. Like I said before, we're not getting the Air Jordans, right? But we might get a pair of New Balance.
Yeah. So you got someone who's used to dealing. So a case where
Mhm.
a case manager is involved, a lot of what the lawyer might do or the OTs might do gets offloaded to you because this is kind of what you is that you do. Now, as the years go along, let's hope it's not too many years, but the catastrophic, you're looking at a life changing, it's often a
Yeah.
lifelong um, pace of survival or of recovery, I should say. As the years go along, do you find that your role changes? Do you, I mean, because in
Mhm.
physiotherapy, for example, it can start very intensive, twice a week, three times a week,
Yeah.
down to once a week, twice a month, whatever, and then it off after a while. Do you find that that happens with you as well?
Yeah, so I would avoid the words "falls off" because I feel like if I fell off
Dials
something, then
back,
I sure, but then I'm not doing my job, right? If
right?
I've lost sight of someone, then I'm not doing a job. But Remy, right? So alongside the team, everything I do is kind of alongside the team and alongside the survivor, right? So at the beginning, there are lots of medical appointments often, right? There's follow-ups with specialists, there's introductory appointments with, new doctors, there's all of those things. So I'm attending follow-ups. There are the one-on-ones that I'm having with the survivor. There are the conversations I'm having with the caregiver. There are all those pieces. We're having regular team meetings. It's amazing. Over time, that's not as needed, right? As long as things are running smoothly and the team is in place and the survivor is happy and the caregiver is happy, then I can sit back a little bit. But I'm always in the background, always, always,
Do you do you
always knowing what's happening.
you have very, very old cases that you may have
I
started
have very, very old cases. Absolutely.
right from the beginning, even, I would think,
Correct. Yep.
because these people don't necessarily go away. They're
Yeah. So one of the things that sometimes happens is when an auto insurance claim settles, a survivor and or their family or their decision makers will opt to keep parts of the team in place. And depending on the relationships that have been built and that kind of thing, oftentimes case management isn't necessary at that point, but sometimes we stay involved. So I'm working with a woman that I've worked with since 2013 at this point.
oh, wow.
Yeah. So I only see her twice a year at this at currently. But at one point we were every week. So, yeah.
That's kind of a success story. Do you get a lot of success stories over time? Are there a couple that particularly stick in your mind?
Well, there's yeah, every I find myself in as a case manager is obviously very different because each person who sustains a brain injury is different. Their worlds are different. Their lives are different. I've had some, really interesting situations. I helped put a team together for a client of mine who lives in Hungary, of all places.
Wow.
And we were able to, with the support of the insurance company, after lots of communication and back and forth, we were able to send some treatment team members over to Hungary to interview and train some local people to put together a rehab team and successfully move my client from virtual support, because we were doing a bunch of support from here while he's in Hungary, um,
Wow.
to actually being able to move forward with his rehab and having people and a physiotherapist there and a swim program and going to the gym and a volunteer placement, none of which we could have done virtually. So that's one of my favorite feathers in my cap for sure. That was a great moment. But then on a much smaller scale, Remy, like there's even things like I had a client who sustained a pretty severe brain injury, needed a lot of support, both physically and like with attendant care and remembering to do things. And she required, because of her injuries, not her brain injury, but because of her injuries, she required abdominal binders. And those were cumbersome, and she would forget to wash them and she would leave them at the gym. And like we went through so many. And then light bulb moment, we were able to actually get the adjuster to approve Lululemon medical grade compression garments that had at the time you were able to exchange when they started to wear out at no cost because that was part of their guarantee. So we got a treatment plan approved for swim shorts and yoga pants and all sorts of things that she obviously could not forget anywhere because she was wearing them and she was able to put them on herself. And things like that, and sort of thinking creatively and outside of the box, right, is a big part of my job. um I think people assume that there's like a sort of standard protocol, right? Like a prescription. Here are the referrals I'm going to do for every single client. And that's OT and that's PT. And if you have cognitive communication issues or speech challenges, there's a speech language pathologist. But there's also yoga therapy. There's also music therapy and art therapy. There's also, right, helping a client to get a therapy dog set up. There's also the return to leisure activities. And, you and I share a love for adaptive climbing, right?
Hmm.
There's
Yeah.
all of these things. It's sort of endless. Like, really, what I tell my clients and caregivers is that, if we can think of something, we can likely make it rehab. It's really sort of endless.
Well, what about financial concerns? I mean, a lot of people cannot
Hmm.
work, particularly if they're catastrophic, and if they're waiting for a
Yeah.
settlement, their rehab may be paid for, but the rent may
Hmm.
not be, or something like that. You help out with that, locate people in housing that can, or alternative work, or sources of funding, that type of thing.
So certainly sources of funding. Part of our role is to help with all of the standard applications, right? So everything from ODSP to CPPD and everything in between, disability tax credits, all that good stuff. PS, there's a great talk on our YouTube channel already covering
I
some of this
hear.
stuff. Just gonna say that
Little plug there. Great.
little plug.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, certainly I can help with all of that paperwork and do help with all that paperwork. And in terms of housing, yes, but there are ways to ask the insurance company to cover some costs associated with things like housing. Um, but it's a really challenging situation. I wish I had a magic wand to say, here's money for you. Um, Sadly, not the case, right? So, to the extent that I can within my scope of practice, and then using the resources and people around us, we can sometimes come up with creative solutions. But it is sometimes a very long wait for settlement to happen.
Yeah, and even in this area where is a little bit of better access to funds than for some for in more remote
Mhm.
regions or some,
Absolutely.
isn't like
People
especially someone. Yeah, go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say people end up unhomed, people end up, at food banks for the first time in their life, people end up in really awful situations. So again, remembering to connect with local brain injury associations, because they know the most about the community resources available to help with people. And, places like the March of Dimes who have, case managers who are okay, you're not paying for that service, right? It's there for you to access and they help. It might be shorter term, Remy. It might not be like having a catastrophic case manager who's with you for 13 years kind of thing.
But they're
But
there for the crucial time. Often at the very beginning when the case
correct.
caregiver and the survivor are going, what do I do now? This is what's happening. What's
Yeah.
going on? I thought this was going to disappear and it's
Yeah.
here and now I have to look after this person.
Yeah. And I think thankfully the science is finally sort of catching up a little bit. I say that tongue in cheek, not a scientist, just a case manager. But the research maybe is a better word than the science. The research is catching up around concussions and around the fact that they are brain injuries, right? They, for people, have considered concussion to be a different thing than a brain injury.
Well, I'll
It's
be
not.
honest. We were one of those people.
Of
We,
course, of course.
sit in a dark room for a few weeks and it's all going to go away and then you go back
Well,
to your work and you're fine. And
yeah.
for some people that's true, but
Right, but
for
all the there's a lot of considerations that feed into that, right? And I think, unfortunately, Sydney, I'm gonna bust out a hockey reference because we're in the playoffs. If he gets a concussion, he gets to go to some fancy clinic in the UK and get the best care for 48 hours, and then comes back and he appears fine and normal. Like, no wonder we think that that's the case, right? But yeah, it's, often not. So I think, important for all levels of brain injury, all types of brain injury, to have the support, whether it's paid through the insurance company or whether it's accessed through local brain injury associations or places like March of Dimes, right?
yeah, and we're lucky to have that. And we're lucky to have people like you. So thank you very much for talking to me,
Thank
Rachel.
you.
This has been
My
very
pleasure.
informative. I finally figured out exactly what it is you do and just why you're such an amazing person and your job does and much of a difference you've made in people that I've seen that you've worked with and to make what is essentially a pretty lousy situation a lot better, in any way you
Absolutely.
can. So thanks again for talking to me
Thank
and
you.
take care. We'll maybe talk again sometime. All right.
That's great, Remy. Thanks for having me.
Take care. Bye bye now.